And good morning again. Welcome back. Now we'll be looking at the role that culture and heritage can have to help the integration of newcomers, refugees, asylum seekers, which in SINGA France's vocabulary are called newcomers. We have Heidi with us. She is the director of MADE 51 within the Higher Commissary of the United Nations for Refugees. We have also Miriam KURZ coming from Berlin. She is head of project at the STAATLICHE MUSEEN in Berlin. We have Nathalie, the owner of the MIROMESNIL castle, and Sebastien, GÖKALP, director of the History of Immigration Museum in the PORTE area. We also have David Robert, the director of SINGA France, moderating this workshop. David, you have the floor. Thank you. And I think that Nathalie's headset does not work. Or does it? Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Merci d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Between 2014 and 2018, about 5 million people have fled Syria and Iraq into Jordan, into Turkey mostly, but 1.5 million people to Europe. That's about 0.3% of the European population, and yet it was still seen as a challenge in this region. In 2022, after the Ukrainian war began, more than 5 million people fled Ukraine. And that's 1.2 to 1.3% of the European population fleeing their country. They fled to Poland, to Romania as well. And in those countries, that was a bigger challenge yet in terms of economic resilience, in terms of the capacity of those countries to take them in. According to the IOM, the number of refugees, of climate refugees, could amount to 250 million people by 2050. Those figures are not impossible to tackle, but there are huge figures. If you imagine that about 10% of those refugees will be fleeing into Europe, it would mean about 25 million people coming into Europe. But most of them will be staying in their neighboring countries. However, in the 40 to 50 next years, immigration will increase exponentially. And that means that we'll have a number of challenges to look at. How do we adapt the labor market to different languages, for example? How do we welcome those people? How can we work together when you have a society with a growing number of different cultures that have to work together? This is a challenge for all actors, economic and cultural both. We have 5 guests today, and I would like first to turn to Heidi Kreis of UNHCR. And Heidi heads the MADE 51 program that she will be telling us about. Can you first introduce yourself, introduce MADE 51, and tell us how, from the perspective of your organization, you have been looking at the reaction and adaptation of cultural institutions since 2015?
Hello, David. Can you hear me?
Bonjour,
okay,
David.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Merci de l'opportunité que vous me donnez d'intervenir aujourd'hui. Est-ce que l'on peut peut-être voir les diapos correspondantes?
So I'll be telling you about MADE 51.
Alors, quelques mots sur
I work with
51.
UNHCR, so it's the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and our headquarters are in Geneva. So coming to you today on the early morning train from Geneva, and happy to be here.
J'ai donc pris le premier train du matin pour pouvoir être avec vous.
as David mentioned, there's a growing refugee crisis in the world, and it's one of the biggest challenges of our time. As of June, I think it was actually May 2022, over 100 million people are now forcibly displaced across the world. So this is, in the last 10 years, this has gone up dramatically. And we know that 83% of them are living in low-income countries. So they're living in the countries. About 72% are living in neighboring countries. So they're refugees who are experiencing war, persecution. They're crossing the border and living in those neighboring countries, and 83% of which are low-income countries. So you have the double challenge of countries which are trying to manage their own populations and help their own populations to grow and improve. And then you have a refugee crisis on top of it. And we know that the length of refugee crises is just lengthening. So between 15 and 25 years is the average length of time that people will spend as refugees. And if it's a protracted refugee situation, it can go on for even more decades than that. So there has to be some sort of solutions that we find. And for UNHCR has defined dignified work as a very powerful solution, because if you're able to work, you're able to have a productive life, you're able to provide for your families, then you're able to be able to deal with those conditions and live in exile. But how you do it is the question, because we know that when refugees flee, they carry very little with them. They leave behind their livelihoods, they leave behind the jobs that they had, the factories that they worked in, the offices that they worked in, and they carry with them whatever they can as they flee. So here you have, this photo is of the Yazidi refugees fleeing from Iraq, but it looks very similar throughout the world in any refugee crisis. To believe at night they take what little they can. But they carry with them their culture, their skills, and their heritage. And this is something that can be built on when they get into the hosting country, to be able to offer them opportunities. And that's what we've done in Made 51. So UNHCR started Made 51 in 2018 as a way to look at how refugees could use artisanal skills to earn income in a way that could be sustainable. So it recognizes the idea that refugees have productive assets they bring, so they may have left a lot behind, but they carry with them their skills and their culture, and this is the start of an opportunity. So MADE originally stood for Market Access, Design and Empowerment, and 51 is in reference to the 1951 Refugee Convention. So that's defined what a refugee is and gave UNHCR the responsibility to act in support of refugees. So I'll just take you quickly through the model. In MADE 51, the idea is creating dignified work. So we work together with social enterprises. So these are businesses who meet fair trade standards, and we partner them with refugee artisan groups throughout the world. They create products, and those social enterprises bring the products to market. So the idea is that by using a fair trade model, we can be sure that whatever the setting the refugee is, that we have a framework in place to ensure that they are participating in dignified work. So the model looks like this. First, we identify skilled refugees. So this is in either a camp-based setting or an urban setting where refugees live. We have tools that allow us to do this, to find the skills, to see if refugees are currently working in a group, if they're working individually. And then we link them together with local social enterprises. So these are companies that are exporting, they are working in the craft sector. And together with the refugee artisan groups, they develop a unique market-ready product line. And the product line is based on the skills of the refugees' country of origin. So it's looking at the skills that they brought with them, the culture that comes from their country, and how to develop a product line that's building on those assets. And then we connect those products with global buyers. And that's done through the social enterprise directly, and then also through the Made 51 commercial partners.
et par les partenaires sociaux de May 51. Dans ce processus, nous nous assurons d'abord qu'il y ait une conformité et une protection suffisante des réfugiés. Nous nous assurons que les réfugiés sont présents dans cette chaîne de valeur d'une manière où ils ne soient pas mis en danger. Nous voulons qu'ils maximisent leur gain possible. Et nous nous assurons aussi que les produits soient en phase avec nos critères. Parce que nous voulons que la représentation, l'image qu'ils donnent de ce travail des réfugiés soit à un niveau suffisant et que la proposition de valeur soit à un haut niveau. Nous avons donc un ensemble de critères sur les propositions de conception qui vont en ce sens.
Okay.
Merci beaucoup.
Just to take you through the goals. So
Je vais donc aller un peu plus vite, j'ai bien compris. Nos objectifs, nous voulons donc porter les réfugiés et révéler les talents et la contribution de ces réfugiés. Et les boutiques de musées et les institutions ont un rôle ici important à jouer parce que ce sont des produits donc de belle qualité qui racontent une histoire et nous voulons pouvoir raconter cette histoire auprès des gens qui sont susceptibles d'acheter les produits. Nous voulons aussi que les entreprises aient la possibilité de se développer en même temps que les réfugiés et nous présentons des produits uniques sur les marchés, des produits qui représentent vraiment, là encore, la tradition et le patrimoine de ces réfugiés. Et c'est une approche de collaboration. Le commissariat reconnaît en tant qu'agence humanitaire, il peut faciliter et rassembler les acteurs. Néanmoins, le commissariat ne veut pas assumer la responsabilité de l'intégralité de la chaîne de valeur. Et d'ailleurs, il ne pourrait pas le faire. Nous avons donc besoin de beaucoup de partenaires. Les acheteurs, les entreprises sociales, tout un ensemble de partenaires qui permettent de faire fonctionner ce système et de nous assurer que les objectifs sociaux et autres soient en vue. Pour les boutiques de musées, nous sommes en train de parler ici vraiment d'artisanat patrimonial. Il s'agit donc de pouvoir explorer ce patrimoine des réfugiés, que quelquefois ils ont perdu après des années et des années de conflit, ils l'ont perdu en partie. Et donc tout cela vient nourrir les produits qui peuvent aussi être modernisés. Tout cela fait partie de l'histoire qu'on raconte. Et puis bien sûr, c'est une histoire qu'on raconte. Au commissariat, nous voulons nous assurer qu'il y ait des histoires positives sur les réfugiés. Il faut que les réfugiés soient vus comme des gens qui ont des talents, qui ont une contribution à apporter au monde. Et une façon de le faire, c'est de passer par ces produits, de raconter l'histoire dont est tiré ce produit. Donc, nous travaillons à nous assurer que c'est ce qui se fait avec chacun de ces produits. Par exemple, vous voyez ici une collaboration que nous avons faite avec Chloé, la marque de luxe, de mode de luxe. C'est au Pakistan avec des femmes afghanes qui lavent ici les broderies qui ont été faites. Quand vous voyez cette photo, vous pouvez imaginer que les institutions culturelles peuvent reprendre cela pour dire cette histoire et pour parler des défis actuels dans les pays et pour aussi expliquer comment les musées peuvent aider à dépasser ces difficultés. Donc il s'agit vraiment de créer des futurs, des avenirs plus riants pour ces réfugiés. Merci beaucoup, Heidi. Vous nous parlez ici d'une intégration professionnelle, mais pas seulement, puisque vous parlez aussi de changer l'histoire, de changer ce qu'on se dit sur la migration. Et maintenant, j'aimerais me tourner vers Miriam KURZ, qui travaille pour le musée d'art islamique à Berlin. Et j'aimerais que vous nous disiez ce qui a changé dans vos institutions depuis 2015 et comment vous contribuez à mettre en lumière ces capacités et à changer l'histoire que l'on se raconte sur les réfugiés. Oui, merci beaucoup. Je suis ravie d'être ici. Je suis Miriam KURZ. Et ma spécialité, c'est... Est-ce que l'on m'entend?
In this function, I've been working at the Museum for Islamic Art in Berlin, which is located in the Pergamon Museum on the Museum Island for the past 3 years in an outreach project called Shared Past, Shared Future. And today I would like to give you a short impression of the transcultural education and integration and outreach work that we have been doing at the museum since 2015.
et que nous avons commencé en 2015.
The Museum for Islamic Art in Berlin has a particular history in engaging in outreach work and trying to contribute to a more inclusive society and give newcomers chances as well in cultural access. There has been the most famous project is Multaqa, which has been established in 2015. And here, people who have fled to Germany mainly from Syria and Iraq have been trained as museum guides and have since then offered tours free of charge for other Arabic-speaking newcomers, or also of course people who have already been in Germany, because there hasn't only been migration in Germany since 2015, of course, and because
puisque des immigrants en Allemagne arabophone, on en a depuis bien plus longtemps que 2015, évidemment. Et donc ça permet de partager ce patrimoine avec ces publics. Un autre projet de diffusion, c'est le projet Tamam, dans lequel nous travaillons avec des éducateurs de différentes communautés en Allemagne. Nous avons développé là des critères pour l'éducation culturelle dans les mosquées allemandes.
The two of those projects actually focus on specific target groups, and then for the latest project we have decided that okay, we need to broaden our focus.
Nous avons voulu
élargir notre
public.
Integrate or give refugees, for example, access to culture and also empower them by training them as guides, for example. But we actually need to deal with the more long-term consequences of migration and how this changes the society. So we like to perceive German society as a migration society, which is still sometimes an issue, as probably you're all familiar with. And so we decided in our last project to really take the whole of society as our target group and try to provide for a more inclusive society. So we want to strengthen actually participation, empowerment, and cultural access for everybody, and we think that this can only happen if we manage to reduce discrimination, exclusion, and stereotypes that exist within society. So with this project and the different educational materials that we have been developing, we actually want to diversify ideas of Islam and migration that prevail in German society. Oh, I just see that the slide doesn't look perfect, but it's fine. So we've just launched a new e-learning platform where we provide different materials for, say, art classes, ethics classes, religion classes, and so on, different subjects that can be used in regular school education. And all of them bring Islamic art and cultural heritage into the regular school education. And this is, in our opinion, a means to create a more diverse image of Islam and also of the benefits and the positive impacts that migration processes can actually have, how historically normal those processes have been, because there has always been migration and it actually has a very big potential for innovation. And we also want to look at everything that we actually share with what we perceive as different cultures and different regions. We have also created a toolbox together with the project Multaqa, which also challenges ideas of migration and shows actually how many things actually migrate and how racialized often our understanding of migration actually is. And so we're trying to challenge this in toolbox sessions that we offer free of charge in youth centers and schools in Berlin. So we ask, since when has the paprika actually been living in Germany, for example, and how does architecture actually travel, those kind of questions, and why do we call some people expats, why we call others refugees, what is the difference here actually? And the last short impression, this is really like rushing through what we've done, is a game. So we've developed a historical adventure game that takes you through parts of Southern Europe and also Northern Africa, Western Asia and Central Asia in the 15th century. And here it's about discovering medical knowledge that has actually prevailed in the Islamic world in the 15th century. Discovering, for example, because the quest is there's the ruler of Granada, which then has been Muslim, is sick, and his doctors in Andalusia, they cannot find any healing for him. So the players have to go on a quest and try to heal him and try to gather the knowledge and the instruments they need for this. So they travel. You can see the map here and the different stops you can take. And you discover, for example, how musical therapy has been practiced in Cairo and Baghdad at the time. And yeah, with this, we hope to help creating a more inclusive society on the long run. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is the game on sale?
It is unfortunately not on sale, but schools and youth centers can order it for free with us.
Okay, thank you so much. I think there are going to be an interesting mirror with Sebastien GÖKALP. Bonjour Sebastien, merci de votre présence.
Thank you for being with us, Sebastien. Listening to Miriam quotes, we can see that the Museum for Islamic History in Berlin. How do you want to react to that? Thank you. My name is Sebastien GÖKALP. Can you hear me? Actually, I was asking you a question. Can you hear me?
C'est bon? Tu m'entends? Voilà, Sebastien m'entend.
All right. Can you hear me now? All right. In the meantime, some music, maybe? Okay. So, Sebastien, I was saying, listening to what Miriam KURZ was telling us about her work in the museum in Berlin, in the museums in Berlin, it probably echoes what you do, because they're not centering on the immigration itself, but on how society can think about inclusion and take something from migrants. So you've seen the game, the e-learning platform, the classes that they have developed to show that immigration is actually an opportunity for our societies. And I think this might echo your work. I think that your institution is in France the only one that looks at this issue in the same way. Can you tell us about that and what you do at the National Museum on the history of immigration? Well, our museum was created in 2002, right after the elections showed that a quite xenophobic party garnered a lot of votes in France. And after that, we thought that it was time to work against the clichés in immigration. And Jacques Debon was tasked with creating this museum that opened in 2007. It was under Nicolas Sarkozy's presidency back then. And the aim of our museum is to work on how we live together. And earlier we heard from ICOM about their very scientific approach. And as far as we're concerned, we want to look at the definition of immigration as well and what immigration is in a scientific way. We're not here to say that immigration is the good thing or bad thing. We are showcasing what immigration is, and then visitors can make up their mind about that. So that's what we're looking at, and that's our objective. And in my opinion, our museum is always in the news, because there's always something about immigration in the news. If you look at BFM or CNews, there's always a feature on immigration. I think that is very interesting because in those on those channels, they like to show immigration as a scary thing. But in our museum, you can look at immigration in a much more scientific manner. And you can look at what it is, and you can look at artifacts and a number of things to understand what it really is. And I think in a symbolic fashion, it's very important as well, because it's a space where you can think about immigration. We also organize a number of conferences. It's a place where you can learn about the history of immigration. We have an information center and a documentation center. You can carry out your research there. You can go to conferences. And I think that it leads to a more peaceful debate. You can do that on our premises, but you can also do it online. So today we're at Museum Connections, and I'm very happy to be here. And I think that in this context, it's important to understand that we are a museum of objects as well. This is part of our collection, of our exhibition. It's object-based. Today, we have a collection on the history of immigration, focusing on 12 dates. First, there's 1685, which is the date at which the Black Code was implemented in France. And therefore, there is a legal code that looked at the place of slavery and black people in France. So that's the first day that we look at, all the way to 2015 and the Mediterranean crisis. So we have all those dates. We have 1889, which is the year that the nationality code was reformed in France as well. So we have those different topics, and they are anchored in the history of our country. And we like to show how this articulates with today's society. We have 3 different collections. Some of you might already be aware of that. We have a collection that is focused on society. For example, on the ships. For example, we have life jackets that came from the ships, the rescue ships in the Mediterranean. So that's an example of an object that we display to try and illustrate the history of immigration in the Mediterranean. We also have the Encyclopedia of Migrants, where you have 400 snippets from the personal histories of migrants that are taken together in this encyclopedia. We also have the Araga project with pictures taken from rescue boats, such as you can see here. So you see that this articulates together the history of immigration and contemporary art taken together. At the core of our topic, we have refugees, but we also look at migrants and other categories of migrants. We have a number of contemporary art artifacts as well. Looking at the issue in a different light. We try to talk to the whole of the French society. I would almost say of the international society, but mostly we have French visitors. And that means also a lot of people who are against immigration, people who do not think of refugees as people that we need to support, but as a problem. So we need to bring to the table a number of different approaches and ways of looking at that. Right now we have an exhibit on foreign artists in Paris. John Mitchell, Picasso, for example, those are people who migrated to Paris. And we like to remind visitors of that and to show that immigration is also a positive thing. So we try to demonstrate that in a number of direct and less direct ways. Here you have a sculpture of Barthélemy Togo, and we have cross-cutting exhibitions. We have one on borders and one on the culture of welcoming migrants in France as well. We also have a number of mobile exhibitions that tour all of France to try and make it clear what a refugee is, and also to make it clear that people don't leave their homes out of pleasure. They leave their homes because they have to for political or climatic reasons. This is something that we try to demonstrate. We try to use comic books, cinema, or works of art to explain this history. We also have a number of living arts features. We also had the UNHCR that came to our museum with a debate competition. We have the volunteers program that made it possible for volunteers to welcome young refugees. And this project that we had to stop for now, which is the workshop of exiled artists, where exiled artists come and talk to our audience. So this is both a platform and a physical space to display heritage works of art. Thank you very much. Thank you. And moving on now to the other side of cultural institutions, we'll be looking at a heritage private museum. It's not based in Paris, and we will be hearing from Nathalie ROMATET, the owner of the MIROMESNIL castle, to tell us about recent migrations and how it changed or did not change her view of this rule.
Hello, everyone. So let's have a look at a short film that was made. So I'm in charge of Château MIROMESNIL, which is by the sea in the city of Deneb. This is a private museum, in fact, and does not benefit from subsidies. It has to earn its own money. We have a very different audiences, about 30,000 visitors a year, and we've launched into a project around cuisine. And so it's known as Chiche Chef, or Chef I Dare You. And so the idea was to understand the experience of people arriving in France with nothing, really. And so we'll launch the film. We'll see if we can get sound. Translation is not sure to have the sound. Well, it's okay. So here we are in our little vegetable garden, fruits and vegetables. It allows us to show the way people lived before. People grew their own fruits and vegetables locally. And so for us, this was also a way to work on the issues of nutrition and local produce. And we've worked with various associations. For example, we've got one association that works with the children who've been removed from their homes for various reasons. And so the association came to us, and in fact, and with other associations said, well, what can we do to work with these children? I mean, this is very wildly different from what we're used to doing. Of course, we are a fringe historical monument. But then the idea came to put together an activity around a chef. And so, you know, what do we all have in common? Well, we all have to eat, right? And we have our historic vegetable garden. So the idea was to work with these children who were in a very difficult situation, who've been taken away from their families for protection reasons. And, well, we're talking about growing the food, how to make food. And what we did was we put together a competition, in fact, with top chefs. This is our third edition, in fact, and really it's a wonderful experience. So in the morning at 9 a.m., we've got immigrant children in particular from Mali, Iraq. They don't necessarily even speak French. And there are other children coming in with various groups. And, well, at times they're quite shy. They don't know what's going to happen. And it is a very impressive monument as well. So they can be a bit shy about getting into action. And then the association known as NUTRICET, most of its work is focused on people suffering from malnutrition. So all of those different types of people come in here at MIROMESNIL, and we have to try to make something happen. So we put together teams, we mix up the teams, the children and adults, and we start by going into our vegetable garden to see, well, what's growing right now, carrots, cabbages, etc. for now. And then we have workshops, and it's really a wonderful thing. So, for example, how much sugar is there in a bottle of Coca-Cola or in a apple juice, for example? And this can really raise awareness. And so there are all these different workshops. I myself have run some workshops where you are blindfolded and you have to taste something and say what it is. And so it's really fun. And what emerges from this mixing of groups is that, well, the adults will often explain to the children what's going on, and it really creates a very interesting connection. Then we have lunch together. And so the idea is to continue a very nice experience together. And then we have our star chef who will come in and give some recipes, on different themes, soups or pasta. And then they're going to work in teams to make the recipe. And we can even have a little competition, and everyone goes home with the kit with some ingredients. And so we've published a book with the recipes from our star chefs who have participated in this project with some simple recipes that you can make, anyone can make. And so, so it's something that, of course, we had to adapt to a bit. Of course, we're used to having an audience, visitors of different types. It's true. But here, things were quite different. Here, we were trying to share a French culture through food. So it's very, very basic, but it's also very engaging, very touching. The happiness, this sharing moment is truly enjoyable. It's a wonderful moment for the children, for the adults. Thank you so much for that. Well, what we can hear from all of that, and Miriam has also mentioned this, is that, you have to bring people together to get those stories and notions and understanding of things to begin to evolve. And so I guess for cultural institutions of all types is our, visitor strategies. Can something be done to work toward this greater sharing, and in particular with those who are not used to such things? And so we are lucky to have with us the head of National Museums of France, Sandra. So tell us about the CMN. So, in fact, I'm head of the visitors department of the French National Monument Center, Alexandra DROMARD. So, in fact, we are a national public institution which manages about 100 museums or monuments around France. Some are very small, monoliths in Brittany, for example, to the internationally known Mont Saint-Michel, and to the Mallet-Stevens building. So very great variety of sites. We report to the Ministry of Culture, and our mission is to welcome all types of visitors, including those who might have had very little contact with the culture. And so our topic here today is new arrivals, including migrants, many who had to leave their countries under traumatizing conditions. So what's important to us is to be as inclusive as possible. So for us, it's true. We want to welcome a very wide audience. And for some types of visitors, we need to develop some specific tools. So, for example, we will work with associations to help us with this and other organizations. They can either be county-run or state-run institutions working with various communities, including those that don't necessarily speak French and have very little experience with the French culture and museums. So we're trying to open up our museum and monuments, and we work with artists to help us with this as well through special programming. So, for example, plastic artists, but others in dance or music, for example, so that we can allow not only these newcomers to enjoy programs, but also for our French audiences to be in contact with these newcomers, so that we see that as a role as well of our monuments. And something that we try to put forward in our program. So, for example, 2022 in Brittany at a cairn, we put in place a project with the school working with young people, young migrants. We were working in conjunction with associations. So the idea was to create a visit, and we worked with Bertrand Mengy, an artist. And these megaliths, in fact, exist around the world, in Kenya, for example. So people learned that it's not specific to Brittany. So these are something that one finds a bit all over the world. So it also exposes people to that type of interesting information. And so there was a very interesting project put together. There was an artistic installation that was created, and all visitors took advantage of this and participated and really enjoyed it, judging by the number of visitors. Now, if we at Tour de la Rochelle, it talks about migration, not just immigration. The oppidum, for example. This is a very small site, in fact, on a rocky outcropping. And here we see the convergence of different cultures that produced this site. So the idea is to be as open as possible, to offer something interesting to different audiences. Okay, thank you. So we've seen there's quite a variety of ideas, different policies to facilitate immigration. Heidi, I have a question for you.
There was only one criteria to observe a among the museums you work with to define the quality of an inclusion policy? Oh. S'il y avait un seul, I don't know French or English. English, fine. You got me in the helmet? No? Okay. Alors je vais en... Okay. If there was only one criteria to observe in the inclusion policy of the different museums for UNHCR, what would it be? What is the first thing you look at when you look at a cultural institution to say, okay, this is an ambitious inclusion policy?
Can you repeat one more time?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Is there one criteria that you look at first when you discover a cultural institution to say, is the inclusion policy of this cultural institution ambitious enough? What is the first thing that you look at?
I think from my position, I'm not necessarily looking at that aspect of it. I guess I would say that what would be important is to look at how, from UNHCR's perspective, how refugees are presented in a way that tells the story, so gives the various perspectives that are available, and also helps people to learn what a refugee is and how, they are people just like you and me, but at the same time have gone through these adverse circumstances, and how then someone could support or look at opening up their lives to working somehow with refugees, either through the communities that they work with or through the institutions that they support. So, maybe.
Thank you very much. Sebastien, est-ce que, en tant que musée,
so as a museum on the history of immigration, do you look around at other institutions to see what they're doing? Well, I'm, first of all, happy to meet the CMN here today. Well, since last October, we've been participating in an international project. There are some 20 migration museums around the world, so we've been sharing practices, and we've been working on topics of diversity as well. This is something that is very present in American institutions, perhaps a bit less in France, or at least it's not the same type of approach as the Americans. The notions of diversity are rather complex in France. And so how can diversity be taken into account by a cultural institution in relation to our visitors, for example, and also through this sharing of good practices? The American institutions, in fact, have noted that there can be difficulty to talk about inclusion when you don't even have that type of audience coming to your museum. So it's not just about raising awareness that's important. So that's a bit of the challenge. Okay, this was just a gathering to share best practices, but we haven't gone any further than that for the moment, but it does raise some interesting questions for us in the way we work. So when we talk about representation, yes, this can be touchy topics as well. And so the notion of representations and representativity can be shaped in different ways through the museum's policies. So on that side, Miriam, can you hear me okay, Miriam? Good.
I'd like to know two things. First, did 2015 change a little bit the way of your museum was represented? Did you change some people or the way of thinking about representation functions. So the ambassadors of the museum, do you have some more diversity in the last years than before? First question. And second question, if the budget for your inclusion policy were multiplied by 10, what would be your dream and your first action?
So in terms of, if we have more diversity now and if also representation has changed, I would say yes, but it always depends on what dimension you look at. So there's the internal dimension, right? Our staff, for example, I can see that there is changes, but slow changes, I have to say. So still, I would say the staff at the state museums in Berlin in general is overwhelmingly white and middle class, which also depends on the kind of, right, usually you need a PhD in art history, so who brings that? There's a lot of administrative work, so you need perfect command of German, for example. Who brings that? So there's those issues, but I can, recently also notice changes in the diversity among our staff and an increased awareness in the hiring policies. But this is slow. But something else is, for example, the level of our exhibitions. And right now at the Museum for Islamic Art, we are redesigning our permanent exhibition. So we will close during the next years, actually, and then reopen in 27. And this gives us the chance to redesign everything, basically. And here, for example, we now include the perspectives of many multiple guides, for example, on specific objects. So you will be able to read labels and also have their voices on the audio guide, for example, telling their own perspectives and personal stories about certain objects and how they personally relate to them, for example. So this is something where you can clearly notice change, and also you see that now the curators are trying to broaden the perspectives that are shown and represented in the exhibitions and really open up here. And there's also other parts of civil society who are actually invited in bringing in their perspectives into the audio guide program, for example. So here we can see that there's more diversity also in terms of our outreach programs and the educational programs. I can see change. Yeah. And your second question, what would I like to do if we got more budget? So I think you said for the next 2 years, right? What I would really do in terms of, because I'm mainly responsible of the outreach and education work, what I would dream of is with an increased budget, I would love to offer teacher trainings in all states of Germany, for example, trying to spread this work against making people more aware of stereotypes, of the biases that we all have, of discrimination and how it affects certain groups of people and how it hinders us actually from being a society where everybody can be integrated, because I think it's really important to see integration not only as a one-way road, only the newcomers have to integrate, right, but everybody actually has to integrate because society is constantly changing. It's always changing, so everyone needs to integrate and to adapt all the time. So I would really love to do this, to offer trainings for the police, those kind of transcultural education trainings, right, for medical staff, because I think those are all very important social fields where discrimination and stereotyping prevails and can have really actually life-threatening effects. So this is what I would love to do for the next 2 years if we had an increase in budget. I hope you can do something for us, David.
Yes, of course. Just let me give a phone call and I get back as soon as possible. Même question pour vous?
Same question for Alexandra. If you suddenly had a huge increase in your budget, I think Miriam mentioned for Multaka, we've got a program in France that offers visits in languages like Pashto, Farsi, and Arabic. I mean, if we were going to be really ambitious about an inclusion policy, what would we do differently? Well, what's difficult for us is to develop the partnerships so that we can put together projects and reach particular types of audiences. Of course, there were, in the associations, it's difficult as well because, well, the staff at association changes a lot. And so we do have nationwide partnerships with bigger structures, but we need smaller partnerships at a local level as well. So that's something that we need to develop, but it also takes time. And it means that we have to develop close relationships with associations that will continue with the work. And so it shouldn't just be a one-off visit or project. So you're saying it's not just about resources, but also it's the way of developing partnerships. So that sounds like your main mention. So it takes time to develop such projects. Well, yes, for national monuments, by essence, we are working with the long term. Okay, now, obviously, financial resources are important. Human resources are important. So it's not just the funding. Nathalie, what about you? Same question to you. Château de Miroménil, what would you do if you suddenly had a hugely increased budget? Well, I'd like to do something crazy. I'd like to do something to develop more documentation in different languages so that this our French culture and heritage is accessible by all, and so that we could export our projects elsewhere in the world. Because, what we saw happen at our site was wonderful. We would like to see it spread elsewhere. Any questions from the audience? I think there was a question at the back of the room. We'll get you a microphone. Maybe one or two questions from the audience. Hello? There was a question earlier about outreach. I'm wondering, how does the Berlin Museum, how did that go with the schools where you distributed your game? How did that work?
We just released launched our e-learning platform and also the game in December. So this is very recent and very fresh still. But we have been working together with a PR agency that is actually specialized on the educational sector. So they have helped us reach out to all the ministries in the different German states who are responsible for education. So they spread the word. We are advertising it on platforms where teachers exchange materials and so on for the game. We are getting a lot of orders, so people are ordering and it seems to be attractive, but it's still quite early actually to really evaluate our efforts. So this is something we will certainly do, but it has just started in December last month.
We have another question. Well, thank you. This was a very interesting round table. Have you translated the game into French? Has it been translated?
so far it's only available in German, but if there's increased interest, yeah, we might get additional funding and translate it to English and French and see what other languages. That would be great.
That would be the first move with more budget, maybe, translating. Merci beaucoup.
Juste au moins sur la règle du jeu.
Well, if there are no further questions, so, well, it's too bad we didn't have more time for this round table, but, well, that's what happens when you have so many interesting people participating. So, just to quickly conclude, I'd say that, you know, we have to move away from the notion of integration toward a notion of inclusion, and then it's up to our cultural institutions to see how this can be do it. And there are some who are really set the pace. In Germany, in the Berlin museums, already starting in 2015, were really at the forefront of this type of movement. And it's not just about translating things, but how in an institutional policy you can introduce more diversity in everything that you do. Thank you so much, everyone.